we must see education as being the conveyor belt to the economy.
Absolutely.
Economists estimate that investment in early child development can improve a country's GDP by 2%. That is a massive priority of mine. If you ask me in the middle of the night, what do I want this term for me to be remembered by, is my obsession with foundational learning.
We've got Siviwe Gwarube, the Minister of Basic Education in the house.
1 + 1 is 2.
And you said the surname right.
Yes, I literally was about to say, and 10 out of 10 for saying the surname correctly.
You guys hit that, I passed.
I would like you to do a young tutorial for the country.
A lesson plan.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, so amazing to have you here. And I mean, you know, it's been such an incredible year in the GNU. But before we go into that, I mean, can you just, what are you listening to right now? What's on your playlist?
Oh, okay. So because I'm currently doing a lot of writing, so I'm currently busy with my thesis. So I am oscillating between really angry hip hop and some really good South African artists who I'm really enjoying, whose music I'm really enjoying. Zoe Matiga is one of them. Nomfundo Xaluva is one of them. So like these are like some jazzy, smooth things. So it's really nice to listen to in the background. And I'm just really finding that this genre is really, really growing. This sort of jazzy meets Afro pop, but it's amazing. So there's a lot of people in that space, and I have an amazing playlist. So I really like music. It's the thing that keeps me going. And obviously when I exercise, I have to listen to hip hop, because if I have to listen to the sound of my heart jumping out of my throat, that is not. I don't want to hear the sound of that. So
yourself panting as
no. You must some loud and so some Drake, some Lil Wayne. Old school Kanye though, not this crazy person.
Yes.
So old school Kanye. So like Graduation.
Pre-2015.
Definitely. Graduation, firstly, was the soundtrack of my first year.
Sure.
So yeah.
That's nice.
I remember very little about roads, but I remember that.
Got some yay going on.
Okay, so I mean, if you had to go to a grade 5 class tomorrow, and the question that one of the learners would ask you, so why did you enter politics? How would you answer that?
That's such an important question, actually. Not because I'm asking who I am. I suppose I need to ask that. But I'm just saying it's such an important question, because I would have to answer this question to a child, and I'd say it like this. I'm just a girl who grew up in a village in the middle of the Eastern Cape. Very typical South African story. Was raised by my grandmother, who was a teacher. She was incredible, the first feminist I ever knew. But there was something about our lives at the time, and we were like lower middle class South Africans, right? But there was something about our lives that just didn't make sense to me as a child. So we lived in a village, but I went to school in town. So every morning, we would get up, we'd get ready, and we would drive out of the village. And as we were driving out, kids were walking to school. We would drive out of the village and drive into town, and my grandmother would drop me off at the school in town. But there was something that really bothered me, to say, like, why do I leave my friends? So the people I'm friends with, when we go to church and whatever, I leave them behind in the village, and I go to the school. And I would ask Mama about, like, what, and she would be like, look, I mean, I'm sacrificing everything for you to be able to get a really good quality education, because we never had that opportunity. And I believe that going to a formal Model C school is going to give you a best chance in life. So even that for me was a framing that says something is fundamentally broken about our country, in the sense that, why is it so unfair? So what made me go into politics? I would say to the 11-year-old, I think they're 11, yes they are. I would say to the 11-year-old, what brought me into politics is I wanted to fight things that were unfair.
Wow.
I've always hated injustice. And so anything that's unfair, I was bullied as a child,
Sure.
and and that's quite pretty common. Anything that was unfair,
Yeah.
I've always wanted to really fight it. And so I went into politics because there are things about our country that are still so unfair that need to be made right. And the fact that I still had to drive far away from where I lived to get a good quality education is an indication that was what was unfair, but that's still the case today.
Yeah.
And so that's why I do what I do.
Love it.
Because over 10 million children still don't have access to the kind of education I had.
And I think-
that was a long time ago.
And especially coming from the Eastern Cape, I think it's one of the worst affected provinces when you look at inequality, just even in the education space. And I mean, Siv, you're a Xhosa woman. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Xhosa.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, this is the birthplace of Nelson Mandela himself, the Eastern Cape. And yet it still persists as such an unequal province. I mean, you said that that's really shaped your identity as a politician. But tell us just a little bit more. Give us like some tidbits, some detail about your childhood. What was it like growing up in, you said a village. Where was this exactly in the Eastern Cape? What relationship did you have with your grandmother?
Yeah.
Just let us in a little bit there.
Yeah. First of all, I come from KwaMdingi, the home of legends. An interesting fact is that Makayandini is from KwaMdingi. Okay, so
Love it.
you better recognize. You better recognize. There's something in the water there, guys. It's not. I don't know. I don't make the rules. Okay, I don't make the rules. So Makayandini is from my village.
Love
So that's always been an interesting fact. When people say, "Tell us something interesting about you," I'll be like, "Yeah. Makayandini is my homeboy. He's not my homeboy. He's significantly older than me, but yeah. So I mean, I had a really typical South African upbringing. If you grew up in rural South Africa at the time that I did, I was talking to somebody, a friend of mine, the other day actually, and they were talking to me about what were like your holidays like when you grew up in the village, because he grew up in a township.
Sure.
So I was like, we have wildly different experiences.
Yeah.
So like in the village, firstly, there was land, man. We could run, we could play. So like what really was about our childhood was play. I just remember playing until you were almost dead. Like you would just, like your parents would, like your mom would have to come and get you and be like, enough. Genoeg is genoeg.
You're like, the street lights are on and you're still out of
Tomorrow is another day. There are no street lights in the village. To this day.
Was this before the Xhosa news or just after
No,
Born in the Beautiful?
not the Xhosa news. That's too
That's too
late.
late.
No. As a young girl in my youth, you need to switch the lights on.
Sure.
If you arrived home and the
Fala
lights were on,
Dickens.
no, you knew you were in trouble. So, like I said, very typical South African,
Sure.
really amazing. And I'm so grateful to my mother, man, because she gave me such an amazing upbringing. She was umama umanyano. So, Sundays were about going to church. She would don the uniform. And we would make Sunday lunch, Sunday course. In fact, we'd like cook in the morning so that and there were no microwaves then. I mean, I'm making myself sound so old, but it's true. I mean, there were no microwaves then. I would we'd kind of make the cabbage and the chicken and then dondo in the morning, and then when we come back from church, now it's Sunday.
Yes.
So really good. We lived with my uncle. He told me everything I know. That's why I really love cricket and rugby. He was so our big tradition was watching Test cricket after Christmas.
Yes.
Warm up the leftovers on the 26th.
Yes.
And put
Boxing
on a
Day.
Test cricket. Yeah. Test cricket for days.
Yeah.
And we would just watch Test cricket. He'd teach me about it. So to this day, for me, after Christmas is all about Test cricket. I don't want to do anything else. I just want. And sometimes now I'm able to go watch it in Newlands or something.
Yeah.
But that was home for me. That was home for me.
I'm interested to know because I follow you on Instagram and I love the cooking that's going on there.
Yeah.
Is that where the Sunday sort of vibe is coming in from home? I mean, sometimes you are asking us, to give you recommendations to find meat. I remember over Christmas you were looking for, I think it was a ham or something.
No, it was a pork belly.
A pork belly.
The Cape Townians finished all of that.
Wrong place to ask for pork belly on the last minute.
Yeah.
So is that where the motivation is coming from? I mean, when you're in the kitchen, how does it feel for you? Does it take you actually home? Are you reminiscing about those moments as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It really does. So my mom was a terrible cook. So part of the reason why I learned to cook so early was because I needed to escape her cooking. She was really bad. She was good at many things. She was just not good in the kitchen. So I learned to cook at a very young age. But there's nothing that fills my heart with greater joy than jazzy sounds that coming from my lounge, a smell of a roast.
Yes.
Hey man, it just feels like everything is gonna be all right.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It feels like a home. You've created a home setting for yourself.
Wow.
And for that 3-4 hours, nothing else matters. Whether you've got friends over or family over, you can just, congregate over like a lot. And I mean, I don't mind slaving for hours in the kitchen.
Yeah.
For me, it's a labor of love. And I'm a feeder. And so people would come over and like I said, for 3-4 hours, nothing else matters. And then the Sunday blues set in. And then it's Monday.
Do you think that's like more important now that you're a minister, actually setting aside time for yourself or to just not have to think about work or not have to think, especially because you've got such a huge responsibility as the Minister of Education. Do you actually, do you set aside time for yourself or you block it out and you switch your phone off? Is that important for you?
I try, and to be honest with you, I'm not very good at it because I constantly have anxiety about things going wrong. So I do have 2 phones and only 9 people have my other number. Okay. 9 people only.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So if I ever did switch off my phone, I would do that. But you're right. The part of the reason why you're so right is because part of the other thing about the department is also broken up in policy work, legislative work, sort of systemic change work, but also and then my favorite part is the children. I really love the bunkies a lot, but also bad things happen to children, and that makes the job very heavy for me. Going to see parents who've lost children in a car crash. Most recently, I went to the Eastern Cape after the floods, that was really, really difficult. It was one of the toughest days on the job because I had to go and meet parents who had either lost children or were part of the search parties that found their children on the side of the riverbanks. Parents who had children who were still missing. And I always say to myself, what am I going to say? And really, sometimes sometimes it's just okay to just not know what to say. And so in my culture, there's a thing called ukvela. So when somebody has a bereavement, somebody has a loved one that's died, usually community members would just go to the house and they would sit with you. And I think there's something profound about that. They wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't necessarily do anything or say anything. They would just sit with you. And I think about it a lot when I have to do that kind of work too. How do you sit with people in their grief? You can't make it better. You can't say anything that will make it better. But how do you sit with people in their grief? But then that also has a massive personal impact. And so when you do go home, you have to think about, am I going to therapy enough? I go to therapy religiously, have been for the past 10 or so years. Am I looking after myself? Am I exercising? Am I eating well? Am I making some time to see my friends and some family? And that's important because then it makes you a far more well-rounded human being, especially when you deal with really heavy stuff like this.
So, Siv, I maybe want to just piggyback on what Ryan has said. And Donovan, because I've also been on your Instagram. So I'm going to join you, Donovan, on that one. But I think the point on, a support system is such an important thing. And having been on your Facebook, I know that friendship is something that's very important to you,
Yeah.
and you have a friend that you've known for a very long time who's still part of your life.
Yeah. Swangila, my best friend.
Yes.
She and I have been friends, I think, for like 25 years.
Oh, wow.
What a blessing, man. I think friendship and people don't put enough stock and value on friendships. I think as a world we've kind of overemphasized the value of romantic relationships to the point where, and those have their place, but I don't know about you guys, but I don't know how I have experienced some true love in friends. People, I mean, that girl has been with me when she was taller than me, so when I was being bullied, she was trying to kind of stand up for me. We've been through it all, man. She got a job before I did, so I used to borrow money from her when I was in university and be like, hey girl, I know you got paid. Please can you help me out? I remember being there when she first got her car and we were like blaring like tunes down on our way to the waterfront. We were like, oh my God, we're so cool. So we've been through all of those things. And then to be able to do life with her now, for me, she knows me before anything else. She knows what I'm about. She was there when I buried my grandmother. She was there when she was there when I first graduated, similarly to her. So I think there's something so profound about friendships. I've truly experienced being held, being supported, being seen through friendship, because this life, the world, is a very cruel place. And if you can find a tribe of people who are about you and you're about them, look after it.
So I mean, you've been in your position as the Minister of Basic Education now for a year. Can you share with us what's some of your main priorities or your top priorities in your portfolio? What are you most excited about as well?
Yeah.
And can I add to that? What is also basic education? I mean, I don't think some of us understand the scope of how big it is as well.
Good question.
So firstly, I think let me answer Luyolo's question first. So in South Africa, we basically have compulsory education for children now since the Bella Act has been signed into law from the ages of 6, so grade R, to grade 9. So that's a compulsory age. So if any parent is not taking their kids to school in those ages, they are breaking the law. And then, of course, children can move on to grade 10, 11, and 12, and that is...
FET college.
Yes, or they can go to an FET college, or they can go to a community college and the like. So that's the scope. But here's the change that came about a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, the function of looking after early child development centers moved from the Department of Social Development into education. The reason why that's very important, in my view, is that South Africa has always had this tendency of putting a lot of value and stock in matric results, right? So it's a little bit like baking a bread, right? So you don't obsess. You do a lot of baking.
I do.
So imagine not obsessing about the ingredients,
the quality of your ingredients,
the quality of your ingredients, whatever. Just kind of shoddily putting that together, and then putting it in the oven, and then hoping that in 2 hours' time your cake is going to come out well. So it defeats the logic, right? So what you want to do is you want to have quality ingredients at the beginning. So that's why for me, I think it's such an important opportunity that 0 to 18 becomes the business of basic education, and that we shift this obsession around, did we bake enough cakes, to saying, are we baking good enough cakes? And we can only bake good enough cakes with children if we focus on them from when they are 0 all the way from until they are 6.
Absolutely.
I dream of a time in South Africa when we will obsess about national results that tell us how many children in grade R are grade 1 ready. How many children in grade R can read and read for meaning. That for me is when we would have really done the strategic reorientation we need to do. Once we start obsessing about that, because I'm telling you guys, once you leave children behind on that scale, they are unlikely to ever catch up.
Yeah.
And if they do, the catch-up mechanisms are expensive.
Yeah.
So then we spend a lot of money trying to
Yeah.
get kids to take up
Yeah.
maths, science, get them to extra classes.
Yeah.
There are parents who say, our children don't even have lives. They sleep at school on weekends.
Yeah.
That's not right.
Yes.
That's not how you grow a holistic child.
Yeah.
So we have to do the investment right at the beginning. So that is the scope of basic education, and it directly links to my priorities. My priorities were simple. We've got to invest in the foundations of learning right at the beginning. We're glad to see that there's been an increase in the subsidy. So from the pie, at Treasury, we received a slight increase, a 10 billion rand investment over the next 3 years in trying to make sure that we formalize ECD centers. Now, why is it important to formalize ECD centers? Most ECD centers in South Africa, as you know, are run by Tanis, Omas, and Mama, who just saw a gap in the community and, looks after children, perhaps for a fee. And so what we've said is we're not going to upset that ecosystem, because there's a role for that to happen.
Yeah.
And the state doesn't have money to just build mini ECDs.
Yeah.
So what we've said is the strategy is we're going to find the ECDs where they are. We're going to help them comply.
Yeah.
So we're going to upgrade infrastructure to make sure that there are toilets, to make sure that there are beds, toys. We're going to make sure that we introduce a curriculum for the zeros to the 4. We're going to make sure that we also even upskill Oma and say, okay, cool, become a qualified practitioner so that you can be able to do that kind of teaching. So that is a massive priority of mine. If you ask me in the middle of the night, what do I want this term for me to be remembered by, is my obsession with foundational learning. And then, of course, things like infrastructure, safety in schools, teacher development become some of the other priorities.
That's such a fantastic, I think, synopsis of the problem of education in South Africa. I love that you talk about it as if it's a pipeline. And what you put in on the one end at the beginning is going to determine what you get out at the end. Because, and I think maybe we're all in that same generation where I was the first year of FET, the FET syllabus that changed, and I was forced to take like maths literacy, and I couldn't drop it, and I had it was the existential crisis of my teenage year, back then. But before that, they had OBE, which was outcomes-based education.
I was an OBE kid.
And I was just thinking back to that of again, they were looking so much at the outcome and not at what they were putting in at the beginning. And they call it foundation phase for a reason, because you're building the foundation of what's going to become a full structure of a capable human being.
Absolutely. Can I tell you a stat that keeps me up at night, and there's a rallying call for what I do? In South Africa, we take an international benchmarking test for children when they're in grade 4, so when they're 10. And that international benchmarking test, we're with other countries. And in fact, one of the things that I'm really glad that Minister Motshekga never did was to discontinue South Africa's participation in that. Yes, we do very poorly, but I think it's very important to know where we are in the world. But imagine this. There are 2 types of 10-year-olds in South Africa. One, there's a 10-year-old who is Ryan's child, who from the time they are 6 months old, they are playing with toys. They are being read books at night, bedtime story after bath time. They're playing with puzzles. By the time they're 2, they're already able to manipulate certain things. By the time they're 3, they probably are able to even get a gadget from the parents. Their development is so much more than it's worlds apart. So they turn 4, they probably go to a nice ECD center where they get taught there, and they get taught how to read. They get and then they get to grade 1, they're already really far ahead, grade 2, grade 3, and then when they get to grade 4, they take this benchmarking test, right? And they pass it with flying colors. Then the second child, the second 10-year-old in South Africa, comes from Mqandul, for instance. They're not read to at home. They don't go to an ECD center. The first time they interact with a book, they are 7 years old in grade 1. And the same children take the same test
Sure.
when they turn 10. And that child fails. And we are told that child is cognitively in grade 1. But it's not that child's fault.
Sure.
The system is designed such that you haven't provided quality foundational investment for that child to thrive.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's what we've got to change. The story of the 2 10-year-olds in South Africa.
Sure. I love that. I mean, it really does paint this picture of kind of what has been happening in our country 30 years, past, in that there is an opportunity, there is a scenario where, 2 10-year-olds can be born in the same country but have separate lived experiences and interactions with education as well.
Yeah.
What's your vision for those 10-year-olds? I mean, how do you envision to see an education system that actually deals with that?
Because, I mean, think about it. Those children would have been born in 2015.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And
that's
so
scary.
that blows your mind, right? Like, I mean, how many years after democracy, right? They would have been born in 2015.
Sure.
And that you still have a child who's locked out of opportunities who was born in 2015.
Sure.
We were born in the late, okay, I don't want to.
late 80s, early 90s. Boys to men.
Listen, they started making everybody. They just didn't care about the quality. After 89, they were just making whatever.
I know my 90s out there. I disagree with you.
89 was the cutoff. They were like, after this, we don't care no more. But yeah. So anyway, so I mean, the fact that that child is born in 2015 and that's still the current reality.
Yeah.
And the reality also, Donovan, is that child is poor and black and probably comes from a rural area in South Africa. And that for me is still the fact that it's still tracing the very same patterns that the apartheid government designed.
Yeah.
And we haven't undone that.
Yeah.
We haven't unstitched that.
Yeah.
And so for me, one of the things that we've said as the DA in the GNU is, we are very much committed to jobs and economic growth.
Yeah.
But my assignment in that is to say, how do we undo the unjust system of that little girl who I said the reason why I wanted to get into politics? How do I undo that unjust system so that child has an equal chance to be able to get a good quality education? Sure. Because for me, we must see education as being the conveyor belt to the economy.
Absolutely.
In fact, I would dream of a time where even the Department of Education would sit in the economics cluster. Because if you start thinking about it like that, if you start thinking about learners and young people,
what skills do you need?
Exactly, what skills do you need for the economy? If you start thinking about them as an economic investment, then perhaps you can start making different decisions, right? Because now you think of it as a social expenditure, which it's not. It's an economic investment that you are making.
It's the human capital that you are pumping into the economy, and you have to start investing into that from a young age. But my what I'm very interested in, and this always it really annoys me when you speak to educational practitioners from developed countries, and they come from a very kind of monocultural, monolingual country where everyone speaks the same language, they all kind of think and act the same way, and I think South Africa is very different, obviously, because we have 12 official languages. And we often have children who, before the age of 6 or 7, when they enter the school curriculum formally, they have spoken or only learned in their home language, maybe in a second language, and suddenly they are confronted with English or, Afrikaans in some settings. And I think you get this desire from the parents that they learn in English because they want their kids to have more opportunities as a result. But you have these kids with different levels of English as well, or no English at all compared to others who are fluent or first language speakers. How do you think the department is going to help us deal with that in terms of foundation phase education?
And you've articulated the problem perfectly well. I mean, that's why one of the priorities is mother tongue based bilingual education. And I want to debunk one or two things that are sometimes misconstrued. The notion that if you teach children in their mother tongue, somehow they're going to be left behind with the language of the economy is nonsensical. And let me tell you what happens, the injustice that happens. So in South Africa, if you are taught in your mother tongue from grade R to grade 3, and then when you get to grade 4, the switch happens, and now everybody must study in English. But if you are not English speaking, or if you're not English speaking or didn't do English in your foundation phase, the problem is that now for the first time you are learning English as the language. You are 10. And you are learning through English.
As a medium, yeah.
Exactly. So now you're learning maths, you're learning science, you're learning phonics and all of that through English whilst also simultaneously learning the language. And this is why when we look at the statistics, particularly Black South African children drop off significantly in grade 4. But children who speak Afrikaans at home and who speak English at home outperform children who don't. Because why? Because they are able to go to school and speak the same language they speak at home. So because they speak the same language at home, at school it's a breeze. And then they don't make a dramatic shift. So then what do? What you do is you emphasize the use of mother tongue education. And you assure parents that I promise you, when a child is fluent in a language and they can read and write in a language, it's much more easier for them to pick up an additional language, a third, even a fourth language. So it's not a matter of you are excluding your child from being able to speak English. And I tell those people the story that when I went to my former Model C school when I first arrived, because my grand was a teacher, I'd gone to school with her before. And I would sit in her grade 1 or grade 2 class. And so I learned to read and write, but in this class only. So then when I got to grade 1 at my now school, I couldn't speak a word of English. Not a word, like literally not a word. But I was the boss of showing the other kids where their names were. Because I would be able to tell you, I'd be like, Luyolo, Mphithi, here's your desk. Tando, here's your desk. Okay? Because I could read.
That's amazing.
But so the language of instruction becomes very important. And I mean, for me, it's less political, but more about how do we use language as a tool of boosting curriculum in schools. And so I think that there's a lot of work that we need to do.
And that literacy is not language dependent. You can be completely literate. I hate this notion that we determine a child's, intellectual capacity based on their ability to master a language. Or one that we've decided. And yes, certain languages are more useful in a global context, but it is just so important, as you said, for a child to have a strong base language from which they can use to kind of branch out into other languages and other fields of study. But let's just talk about moving the conversation into a different direction. Now, let's talk about corruption. You've been a minister now for a year. How has it been, coming into this massive department with a huge budget? We know that you had an issue with a feeding tender, I think, that was in your department, which, everyone was talking about. Was it questionable? I'm not sure if it was actual corruption, but it was definitely something that you stopped in its tracks. Just talk to us a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, so when I came in, one of the things that had been designed was essentially a school nutrition program that would centralize the procurement of school nutrition. Now, this is one of the biggest budget line items in the department. It is a conditional grant, so that means that money comes directly from Treasury into the Department of Basic Education to the provinces for the sole purpose of ensuring that money goes to the school nutrition. It is 10 billion rand a year.
Sure.
It feeds 9.7 million children every single day. So my anxiety when I then knew about this centralized model, my anxiety was, one, if there's massive corruption, we could lose billions of that money. Number two, which central procurer has the capacity to deliver 9.7 million meals every day. And I didn't want a situation where I'm told that there's a strike and trucks are parked on the N3 in KZN and people can't move and kids are not getting their food. Or where there's a flood, Mthatha, and now, you are having people driving in to bring this food. And also, what about the health? What about the freshness of the food? And so it really, for me, the model, so yes, there wasn't any corruption, right? But the model would have certainly opened itself up. And for me, the big thing was the 9.7 million children, for many of whom, that's the only meal they'll get that day. So corruption in the education space, and I suppose also in health and many other departments, has a face at the end of it. And that face is a child.
Yeah.
Because if you're stealing money that's meant to go to school nutrition, that means less children are able to get food.
Yeah.
If you're stealing money that's meant to go to scholar transport, that means more children are walking to school, crossing rivers. If you're stealing money for textbooks, these are things, there's real life examples. If you're stealing money for textbooks, less and less children are able to get, textbooks for them to be able to learn. And so it's got a face. And that's what people in South Africa sometimes don't understand, because we talk about these big numbers. Then we become desensitized. We're like, 200 million, dun.
10 billion.
And we sometimes don't realize that at the end of that transgression, at the end of that crime is a face and is a person who's now less poorer.
Yes.
Because of that. So
that's such a good answer, because I was at the time when this was happening, I was just scrolling through some videos, and a lot of commentators on TikTok made this argument that if you're in a prison in South Africa, you get 3 meals a day. But if you're in a school in South Africa, you're probably only going to get 1 meal a day. And I didn't have access to you at the time to ask you, how do you actually defend this argument, or how do you actually defend this particular narrative here? Because people are now saying, well, here the minister is stopping meals, going to schools. What is she doing? But prisoners get 3 meals a day in school. And I didn't have the knowledge, the information you just shared now, which I think is so important, that it is actually about how do we prevent more kids from not having meals at school, when one centralized operation or in this case contractor is responsible for distributing these meals.
And also, just you can't learn on an empty stomach.
Exactly.
Can you imagine, like, if you had to go to school and learn maths and you're starving?
Sure. Pie sounds very hungry.
Did you know what I mean? Like, it blows my mind. And and I've never had to worry about that. I've never had to worry about whether sometimes I'd get really a bad sandwich. I did tell you my mother was a bad cook. But I've never had to worry about whether or not I'll be able to eat at school. And the fact that those children come from homes where there isn't even that ugly sandwich to go away with is reason enough for government to say, we should be able to provide breakfast and lunch for children in schools.
Absolutely.
So that they don't go hungry.
So Siv, one of the things that I when I think about, basic education, it's kind of like the site where everybody kind of like points to, when we're talking about gender-based violence. It's like, but what are we teaching our kids? When we talk about, what type of skills are we trying to build for our economy in the next 15, 20 years, we point to the school. And so, one of the things that I think have been very interesting, and someone asked me this last week, the boy child.
Yeah.
And the question simply was, do you feel that the boy child has been left out somewhat? And look at me today. I'm sitting next to the Minister of Basic Education, so I can ask that question. But I think there's really a lot going on in our country, and I think there's been a lot going on with gender-based violence. And I think you've shared a few things. I did read a statement that you released a while back about the crisis that we're in. But what is basic education doing about the boy child? Because often, we are seeing the boy child left out and left to the side. And I think the issues and the deep-rooted violence that we have in the country has a lot to do with us as men, but also from a foundational level, as you were pointing out, there's an important role that we need to be thinking about. And I think this goes hand in hand to say that we have to start thinking in a different way about education. We can't only just say, well, these are the subjects, like you've said, there needs to be entrepreneurship because we're looking at the future. But what should we be doing about this foundational aspect when it pertains to the boy child?
That's an excellent question because, again, that goes back to the cake. We kind of throw everything in and then we hope for the best. But I don't want to speak authoritatively on raising children. I don't have children of my own, but I don't believe that's how you raise children. I think that right at the beginning, you've got to make sure of the quality of the ingredients and how do you make them wholesome human beings right at the beginning. So how do we talk about things like your body, the urges that you get, what will happen to you? How do we also talk about consent? What does consent mean? Why must you ask? How do we talk about, and obviously as age appropriate as it gets, right? Because that's important. But you see, that's not the role of schools and schools alone. And that's why a lot of parents will fight you. They'll say, you can't have sex education without me and my involvement as a parent. And that's good because parents must play their role.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because the problem is that now children are coming to them into their being in schools, but ultimately they come from homes, they come from communities. So recently we had our it was earlier this year. Yeah, it just feels like it's been such a long year. Earlier this year, we had our inaugural Day of the Boy Child, and one of the things that we are saying is that an unintended consequence of really promoting girl children from the exclusion of either education opportunities or the economy. The unintended consequence about that is that for about 2 decades or 3 decades, what ended up happening is that we were elevating the girl child, teaching her coding, taking her to places of work, and that boy child was left behind, just kind of on the sidelines. No one was talking to them about values, about how to be an active citizen, how to be a responsible person, no one was talking and having that conversation. Then all of a sudden we go, oh my goodness, we've got a crisis. The crisis is that these boys and these men are killing these women. Now we go, oh, why? Why is that happening? The problem is because you've now developed this one track, which is this girl child who is independent, fierce, and all of these things. And that boy child's self-esteem has not matched the kind of development we've been giving this girl child. So it's not a blame game. I think it's one of those things where as society now we need to take a step back and say, okay, all right, let's have because even UNESCO comes up with some statistics that are scary. Things like how boy children, are likely to contract diseases because they have reckless health, make reckless health choices. And all of these things, but these things are foundational, right? Like things like condom use, things like sexual health. Girls will tell you everything that you hear from them, right? But clearly there has been a neglect of teaching boys about that very thing. And then we wonder why those boys are the ones who are killing and raping women. Because we can't have the conversation without talking about both of these actors. Because women and children and women and girls are not raping and killing themselves, guys.
That is a very profound statement. I run the JCC in the city of Cape Town, and for 3 years now, our boy participation has been 10% in the program. I mean, we send invites to all the schools to apply. We have it in libraries. We flight it on radio. We print flyers. And for 3 years since I've been the custodian of the program, it's been boys has been 10% of the total. And what was quite fascinating was last year in December I presented this module called the JCC as a civic program to schools, to a group of mayors it's called the Strong Cities Network. And there was a lady, I think she was the mayor of one of the cities in Kenya, and she said, I want to give you some advice. And I love your presentation. Great. Love it all. Don't forget the boy child. And I was so taken aback because then she said to me, you've got low participation in your program because, we are focusing so much on the girl, which is absolutely important, but we're having the conversation not with both in the room.
And even, Donovan, even in school. So girls are now academically outperforming boys. Boys are more likely to drop out because of poor academic performance. And even, mean, let's take it back to even with voting patterns. We know that women are voters and men are less active in their civic, in democracy and their civic duties.
Yeah.
So you can just see that, you can see the pattern. And so it's an interesting conversation. And I was actually quite glad. Usually South Africans knee-jerk reaction to some of these sort of more in-depth, difficult conversations is to reject it off the bat. But I was actually quite encouraged to see the kind of feedback, people saying, yes, you know, I want to raise a son that is going to be a responsible young man who's going to, you know what I mean? Like who's a well-rounded human being. So
therein again, I think touches on another crisis, sort of a social crisis in South Africa, because we have a fatherless nation where you have so many children who grow up in households without fathers. And, you know, Siv, you were saying that you don't want to tell people how to parent their children, but at some point there is a responsibility of parents.
Absolutely.
You know, at some point the school's responsibility ends and the parents have to step in. So how do you have, as you said, an education system that till this point has not placed any focus on the boy child, and the boy child who goes home and doesn't have a father, and you know, what happens to these boys? How do we make sure that the system is more inclusive, that it covers all of the sort of bases, so that we can actually raise both girl and boy children to become, you know, respectful, kind of prosperous members of society.
Citizens,
And I think like this touches exactly to the safety school protocol that we, the Safe Schools protocol that Minister Mkhunu and I launched last week.
Yes, I saw.
Because we are saying we've designed a collaborative program between us and SAPS as a Department of Basic Education, because we want to keep our schools safe. But we were very clear to say, look, this won't work if parents are not actively involved in protecting their schools and in instilling discipline. So discipline, for instance, sits within the ambit of the SGB. There's a reason for that. The reason why discipline, what is it called? A code of conduct.
You mean the governing body now?
Yes, yes. The governing body is the custodian of the code of conduct. And the reason being is because the role of the parent in education is critical. You can't simply have a code of conduct divorced from the voices of the parents. And similarly to what you're saying, that look, we can have these programs, we can profile these boys, and we can talk to them about this, but unless they go home to at least a home, even if it does not have a father, but a male figure that says, "Hey, man," a role model that says, "Hey, man, you don't behave that way. You don't speak to an elder that way." Hey, and I just think, I don't know about you guys, but I just feel like, as a country, we've kind of lost that thing of being my brother's keeper, my sister's keeper.
100%.
That you know, yes, it's not my child, but it's my next door neighbor's child. But you know what? I'm gonna call him and be like, "Hey, Ryan, come sit with me. Let's talk about this. No, don't do that. You know, like I don't know. I don't know what it is, but there's very much like we've become a lot more inward focused, and there isn't that communal, hey, let's help each other out. Let me help you out. Let me take your boy. Let me show up for your boy at his soccer game. And those, it's sad for me to say, like, we're not seeing a lot of that in our communities.
We've touched quite a bit on learners. I mean, I know you're very passionate about them. That's sort of your clientele, I guess, or the people that you
the Minister of Cocoa Melon.
There we go. I love that. The Minister of Cocoa Melon. My wife is a teacher. She's a Foundation First teacher. She's
shout out.
Been blessed to be an HOD for about a year now at a primary school. And I asked her just before the podcast, is there a question that you want me to ask the minister? And she wanted to know, you know, what is planned for novice teachers in the next 5 years? How do novice teachers become part of development in the department? And how do they see themselves as career-driven persons that don't have to leave to have a successful career?
That's such an important question because we, you know, in South Africa, it's complex in the sense that we don't have a shortage of teachers in South Africa. We have a lot of teachers, and there's some teachers who are unfortunately sitting at home. unemployed, and that's obviously a massive crisis. But at the same time, we are in the process of saying we want to say to people, if you're going to go into education, please take on things like being a foundation phase teacher, being a grade R teacher, because again, a lot of value was placed on being an FET teacher. You must be a math science, you must be a maths teacher, science teacher, geography teacher at the tail end. And we're trying to say, firstly, when we are recruiting and giving people bursaries, we want 60% of the bursaries that come from the department to focus on foundation phase, to focus on foundational learning. And I think, secondly, to more directly to your wife's point, I think as a department and I think as a sector, we have to be a lot more intentional about attracting talent. And then we have to be really good, because I think we can attract people, but I think the retention is where the problem is. So a lot of teachers will tell you, Stellenbosch did a study a couple of months ago. They did a study around teacher satisfaction. And the study revealed that a lot of teachers are feeling overburdened by the administrative burden of some of the work that they need to do. So the paperwork and the like. And they still have to carve out 7-8 hours of learning and teaching in the classroom. And then still after hours, do that. And then also some of the things around safety. Where do I go to work? I mean, if you went to work in a place where you didn't feel safe, would you continue working there? And so I think there's a lot that we can do as a department to make the not only to make the profession attractive, so that also when you're there are also opportunities for growth, but also basic things, making sure schools are safe, making sure that there's visible policing, so that teachers who are driving to school are not being targeted, and also just making sure that people are well remunerated. There are still in some places where there isn't equal remuneration for grade R teachers, for instance. So how do I then advocate for people to go into the profession if there are still some of those things? Those are the things that we need to really get better at. And the other thing is, which we are working on, is to use a lot of our international partners and corporate partners who are wanting to come on board to say, give us teacher development as an investment. So instead of saying we will offer you 100,000 for prize money for something, why don't you take a foundation phase teacher and take them through a master's program? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So we've got to be innovative. We don't have new money. There's no new money that's coming. But how do we use the current partnerships that we have to make the profession attractive? And then also just a good old appreciation. To say thank you to the 600,000 teachers out there, to say thank you for looking after our nation's children. And I think we just don't do that enough, to say, Siyabulela.
I can hear say on my shoulder, ask her for a raise.
So, as the DA, we said in 2024, rescue South Africa. And that is the mission now. More than anything is for us to rescue South Africa. So what would you say are the most exciting things coming up in basic education that we can look forward to as part of this rescue mission?
So I think firstly, the strategic reorientation I was speaking about of really turning the system on its head to say the most important here is the foundation phase. And really we are working on that day and night to make sure that all our systems speak to that, whether it's through teacher programs, teacher training programs, whatever it is, everything needs to be informed by that strategy. And so that's even the priorities we've set. They're in the context of that. How do we look at the system, 0 to 18? How do we make sure that we get those children in? And then secondly, there's some legislation that's coming before Parliament, which is really exciting, the Children's Amendment Bill. It's going to then give us a lot more powers to be able to do what I'm saying we want to do around formalizing ECD centers, for instance. It brings together departments to say, like, for instance, COCTA, what's your role in terms of zoning some of these ECDs? Social development, what's your role? If a child already is on a child grant, how do we make sure that government systems are speaking to one another? Because, one of the things that really frustrates me about government is that if we were a business, we would be really, really bad at treating our customers. The fact that I have to go to and get an ID, but then at the same time, Home Affairs can't speak to social development. Social development doesn't speak to basic education. Basic education doesn't speak to higher education. Why are these systems not speaking to one another?
Sure.
And if you speak to my colleague Leon Schreiber, he'll tell you this thing, it is very much possible if we can create this kind of, move vigorously towards digitalization. We can start to see that, because we have to see ourselves as a service provider. And I mean, I think if we were competing with the private companies, I think we would be really, really at the bottom. So that bill is coming, and even people like Home Affairs are included in that. So that's exciting. Also, we're about to appoint the National Education and Training Council. I made an announcement about it at last year's budget speech, where we're saying it's an advisory body that's going to advise me, particularly on matters of curriculum policy. A lot of people are asking the question, are you going to change the pass rate? Is the CAPS curriculum still relevant? All of these things. It's important to keep stability in the system, and then create a body of advisors that are not remunerated by the state, that don't have to tell you what it is that you want, who are giving you feedback, and you are evidence led in your decision making. So I'm excited about those things. And then lastly, my very, very big passion is, we are aiming to register over 10,000 ECD centers in the country.
Wow.
Amazing.
And so I really want anyone who knows anyone who runs an ECD center to say, please get in touch with the department.
Yeah.
We're not trying to shut you down. We're trying to formalize you.
Yeah.
And we want you to tap into that subsidy that you're entitled to.
Amazing.
And quickly, Siv, ECD, just break it down. Maybe someone is not familiar with the term ECD. Maybe Ekasi, what would I know an ECD to be or to look like if I'm walking in my township?
Yeah. So in ECD, really, I mean, it could be anything. And Jama being sure earlier, that in our hoods, for instance, it's usually just like Oma who's put together a creche at a garage and whatever, and looks after these kids. So that would be kind of an early child development center, really. Like, it's usually a daycare. Well, it's like a creche or a daycare. So what we're saying is that we want to move from it to just being a daycare, but we want it to be an education center. Where if the 2-year-old is there, they're not just sleeping, napping, but they're playing, they're learning through play. They are interacting with puzzles, but we can't do that investment unless we know you exist. And so that's why we want ECD centers to register with us so that we can invest in them. So to answer your question, like if Umdogokasi wants to know what's an ECD center, that's a technical term, I suppose, government speak that we use. But generally, it's a creche, it's a daycare, it's anywhere where abantwana are being looked after. But again, we also don't just want them to be looked after, we want them to be taught. Because that is where this the gap, we're going to start closing that gap.
The city of Cape Town has a funding mechanism that we are using currently to actually exempt ECDs from the registration processes in terms of the land use and the traffic, etc. So you can actually apply if you're an ECD practitioner, and let's say you want to zone from your current residential zone to business, we will actually exempt you from the cost. And it comes from a fund that we are using to make sure that more ECDs are formalized. I mean, the evidence is very clear. The first 1,000 days of a child's life is absolutely important. I mean, there's some amazing data in how stunting can be prevented if that child is just in an environment where they are constantly learning, fine motor skills are refined. And when you have these ECDs,
a warm meal a day.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
It just makes it a world of difference. And when you know that a DA minister is driving that innovation, a DA-led city of Cape Town is driving a way for people to become more formalized. You want to live in that city, and you want to make sure that minister gets another term via voting to ensure that your child and the children that you will possibly have in the future actually have access access to those opportunities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you say, I mean, economists estimate that investment in early child development can improve a country's GDP by 2%.
Wow.
So it's exactly what we're talking about. That this is not a social investment, you know. This is an economic investment into the country. So when are you having kids? He was talking about future children.
Yes, I know it's a safe space to be unsafe later on. But still, before I hand over to Ryan to take us out. But I don't want to expose your age. But can I? You're 35, right? I think everybody knows that.
I'm 35, but I'm turning 36 in what date is it? Is it
It's the 2nd of July.
2nd of July.
in 12 days?
Okay.
So you're 35, and just out of interest, if you had to look back to that young girl that you were telling us about today, what would you say to her now at this age, to her at that time? What would you say to her?
I was like, yo, girl, look. Firstly, enjoy this hairline. It doesn't last forever. I literally had a hairline that started here. Like I had a thick afro that started I would say a couple of things, and people get asked this question a lot, and I'm always fascinated by what they say. But obviously, remember, you'd be talking to this child. I'd firstly say, it gets so much better. You get so much better that you are totally going to be okay. You'll get bullied. It will be fine. You'll leave high school and you'll go to university. You will move to an amazing city. You will fall in love. You'll have your heart broken.
Yeah.
You lose your mom. You lose your uncle. But you will live such a full life. And your dream to make South Africa, or at least the environment or the community you live in, a little bit more fairer, will literally be the thing that you get to do every day.
Wow.
And how cool is that?
That's amazing.
So I'd be like, hang on to your hairline. Don't worry about the haters. You get to do so much more.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. Serving South Africa is the greatest honor of my life. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but it is certainly the greatest honor of my life. I get to do that, and I get to influence how 13.5 million people live, and I don't take that lightly at all.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of seeing DA ministers in the national administration. It's just how seriously they take their jobs. They're like, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
There's gravitas, and my actions have real, everyday consequences. And especially in your case, it's not just something that happens today. It's a decision that will affect someone for the rest of their life.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where people really need to understand the real importance of basic education. So before we wrap up, the one thing that I know you tackled with like immense passion when you came into the department was pit toilets.
Yes.
And I think that also is such a blight, really, I think, on South Africa and our ability to address, injustice, as you were saying. So just take us quickly through the progress on your pit toilet eradication programs and what, really led you to take that on as a big project.
I think firstly, just towards the end, your question is so important. I think more than just about safety, the use of pit toilets in South Africa is about dignity, both dignity for learners and dignity for teachers. And seeing some of the conditions under which learners were going to school, it really should make you ask the question, can really quality learning and teaching happen here? So an audit was done in 2018 that found there were about 3,900 pit toilets in South Africa. So we've struggled to really work through that backlog. So when I came into the department last year around this time, we were at 92% of eradicating that audit. We are sitting now at about 97%. Obviously, I was quite disappointed we could not meet the deadline of the 31st of March. I really wanted us to get to all 100% of all those identified pit toilets by the end of March. Hugely disappointed. There were a lot of things that that held us back. Things like the construction mafia in certain instances, weather and the like, and also contractors who walk off site and the like. So it was difficult, but it was a difficult defeat. And somebody asked me, they said, I did an interview with someone, they were like, do you not feel like that's a failure? And I was like, you know what? If I set myself ambitious goals to make people's lives better and I don't necessarily meet that goal at the level at which I am okay with that.
Yeah.
I would rather we set ourselves high targets to improve people's lives.
Yeah.
And if you miss it by 3%, you keep trying until you get it right. This notion that somehow we must lowball South Africans because we don't want to look like failures is nonsense.
Yeah.
So we can say, no, well, we'll only do 20%. Why?
Yeah.
Aim higher, work harder, and as hard as it is, even if you don't meet the target, at the very least, you're a little bit closer to making sure that people are having dignity. So we're not going to stop until that backlog is done. And even when it's done, we still want a new audit so that we can see if there's been any more new pit toilets that have been built since 2018. Remember, sometimes toilets break, and so then what schools do, they build backup pit toilets. In fact, the last 2 children who tragically died in South Africa drowned in pit toilets that were neglected and not used. So some of those things, the backlog, the audit I want to do is to go look at those things. Have those things been demolished? Are schools just grounds of safety? So you know what? We will keep making big, audacious, ambitious goals.
Love it.
And even if we don't always meet them, but at least South Africans can know that we set ourselves high standards for them.
Yeah.
And that's the best incentive to raise the pass
Absolutely.
rate as well, I think.
That's
What did you say?
Raise the pass rate.
I will be referring that to the
DJ.
No, to the council. That's going to be looking at a number of some of those things.
important.
Siv, where do people follow you? Where do they follow the journey?
Am I like an influencer now? Must I like follow
No,
my page?
people, you are the Minister of Basic Education.
People want to know what's going on.
I follow you because my child is going to be in school one day. I mean, if I want to complain, I'll probably have to go and write an email to the minister.
No. I think people also, what is really cool about being also like a young minister is that I also get to, so obviously I have people who help me with some of my social media outputs and stuff, but a lot of it, I have access to all my accounts.
Love it.
So I just want to say to people, I see your comments, some of them unkind and some of them really lovely. I see your comments. I may not always respond at the right time that you need me to, but on Twitter, I refuse to call it X. It's not a thing for me. On Twitter, I'm there, and the department's account is there. I'm on TikTok.
Oh, wow.
I'm learning. It's still early days.
Okay.
So I'm on TikTok. And then, of course, for the traditional people, including my grade 5 teacher, I've got my Facebook page. Literally, my grade 5 teacher follows me on Instagram. Mrs. Findlay, I see you. I see you liking all those posts.
Well, she's proud, I'm sure.
But I would love people to interact with some of the work that we do, and we're trying to condense it in a way also that is digestible for young people. We're trying to make it a lot more interactive, and soon we're going to be having the National Teachers Awards. We're going to have a special award again this year, where we are wanting young people to nominate teachers who are going far beyond the call of duty. So there's some exciting stuff. So I'm also trying to breathe some life, man, into so that it's not, like sometimes government accounts are so sometimes government accounts are so boring. Then it's just like see I touch the APP. And you're like,
Three-letter acronyms.
So sometimes you just you want it to be more interactive.
Up,
So we're gonna try and do all of that.
So we are very proud of you.
Thank you,
And
man.
it's so inspiring to hear what you're doing, and I think the country, young people, we see the work, and to see a young person represented in this government fighting to rescue the country is truly inspiring. So all the best, and thank you for your commitment to South Africa.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. Awesome. Thank you, guys. And I will make sure that, as I said to Ryan earlier, we'll keep raising the bar, because I think for too long we've shortchanged South Africans.
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Siviwe Gwarube.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Bo, 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 bo.